I consent to be, yeah, I consent. You go by Mary Page, you use both names?
Yeah, like Mary Beth, yep. All right, it's one more minute.
Where are you from?
I'm from Queens originally, but why can you tell?
Oh, do you
sound like
know? No. I have a friend in Queens, an old friend from my college days. I sent her an email wishing her a happy birthday. We haven't been in touch for 2 years, but I haven't heard back from her and I'm getting concerned.
Oh, I hope it's nothing. All right, there's a lot of people to let in, so I'm going to
24 now.
admit all, and they should be muted. Okay. Hello, hello. We're going to give folks a minute to get in. And for the time being, it's a big, big group. We have like almost 50 people registered. So just going to give a moment or two for people to get in. But you guys can unmute. No, I didn't want people to be able to unmute themselves. Entry. Oh, no, I didn't want to do that. Okay, sorry. Okay. Welcome, welcome. Just admitting some more folks. We have a lot of people coming tonight. So we'll start out muted. I will introduce David, and we are having this on YouTube Live. And when we get started, we'll unmute you because he's willing to take questions throughout. We'll unmute you as you have a question. If you want to put it in the chat, you can do that. Or raise your hand. If you know how to use the raise your hand, I'll help him identify who's there because it's hard to see that when there's so many people. But okay, one more minute. Okay. If you feel like renaming yourself, if you have kind of an anonymous name, then I can just check it against our registration. But no, I can see all your names. I can see you, Sarah. But not necessary if you don't feel like doing it. Okay. Oh, let me let him in. Let him get in. Okay. All right, I've cleared the waiting room for right now. So I'm going to introduce our speaker tonight. It's a pleasure to have David Gold here with us tonight. He is going to talk about his book, Real Catskill Jews, Memories of a Small Town Life in 20th Century America. We have it here at the library, and I will put a link in the chat where you can get a copy if you'd like one yourself, but feel free to come check it out, literally, and read it. David is a historian and a retired attorney and he is a native of South Fallsburg, and he now lives with his wife Pat in Bexley, Ohio. So I'm just going to let a couple more people in and just reiterate that if you want to ask a question, either put it in the chat and I'll try to keep David apprised of the questions in the chat, or raise your hand and I will try to get you, I'll unmute you for questions. Okay. All right, David, welcome.
Thank you. Nice to be here. And it's nice to see some people I know. The others aren't putting their faces on the screen, which makes me wonder what they're up to. Should I proceed or am I waiting for something here?
No. You can go ahead now.
Oh, okay.
I'll watch and I'll let other folks in. There's a few more people that are registered, and I'll just watch and let them in as they come.
Okay. Well, this book was in the works for a long, long time. I didn't start out to write a book. Well, actually, I did start out to write a book, but not this one. I was about 27 years old when I started this. It's a long time ago. I had hair and everything. I just decided to write a book about the history of the Jews in the town of Fallsburg. So I started interviewing people, members of my family, neighbors, and so on. And over the years, I just got more and more of these interviews, and my brother helped me out with them. Nothing ever happened with these interviews, just kind of sat there. But eventually, after a very long period of time, over the course of many, many years, I transcribed them, which was very difficult. I managed to edit them into a reasonable fashion. I did not want to change the actual words of anybody, but I made them coherent, I hope. You know what happens when you have a conversation with people. Most people just speak in half sentences and hem and haw, and if you just present them literally, you don't get a very good narrative. But I did some editing and rearranging and gathered a lot of pictures. And this book is the result. Most of you probably know Alan Barish. You know Alan? Yeah. One day sometime in the 90s, I was driving up my street and ran into Alan and Phil Brown, who's a professor at Northeastern University now. His family had a small hotel in White Lake at one time. They were trying to get money for a conference. They were trying to get a grant for a conference having to do with the Catskills hotels. And it didn't come to fruition. They did not get the grant, but they decided to hold a conference anyway. And from that, they started an organization called the Catskills Institute. So I took part in that. I went to some of the early conferences. One of the things that bothered me about the organization was the focus on the resorts. There's nothing wrong with that, but it kind of bothered me a little bit because I grew up here. Well, I'm sorry, I'm in Ohio now. I grew up in Fallsburg, in Sullivan County, in the Catskills. And I know that the story of Jews in the Catskills is not just the story of the hotels, but everything you read, the movies you see, and the Facebook groups and all this stuff focuses on the resorts. So I said, well, I have all these interviews sitting around. Interviews of people who actually lived in South Fallsburg and built communities. Their story is not just South Fallsburg, it's typical of all the Catskills, well, the Sullivan County towns, some of the Ulster County towns. I said, why don't I put all of this together? The interviews, the photos I was able to get, my own feelings about it, and put it all together and tell this other side of the story of those of us who grew up and lived the life all year. I'm just curious. Now, most of you don't have your pictures up, so I can't see by a show of hands, but I would be interested to know how many people had folks that they knew from the summer who said to them, what do you do here all winter? Yeah, just about everybody. And I had that experience too, of course. I mean, these people thought that life revolved around them. They came for the 4th of July. The town woke up. They left on Labor Day. We all went to sleep. And we revived when renting season came around for the bungalows or the hotels opened in the spring or in the late spring. It always reminded me of Brigadoon, the story of Brigadoon. It goes to sleep until 100 years go by and it wakes up. So anyway, that's the story behind this book. I like to think that these interviews that I have preserved memories that would have been gone. They would have disappeared otherwise. I haven't seen a whole lot of writing anywhere else, especially firsthand accounts of what it was like in the first half of the 20th century, especially, to live in these towns, to be Jewish in these towns, to go to school, to work, to commit crimes. We had a whole life, good and bad. Anyway, as Mary Page said, I'm happy to take questions or to take this discussion anywhere anybody wants to go, at any time. So let me ask you right now, is there anything, any topic you want to talk about, anything you would like to, okay, Sari. You're muted. Can you unmute her?
Hey, David. Hi, everybody. So my first thought, because I'm also writing a memoir, but more family centered, is in your book, in all your interviews with us local Jews, as opposed to the resort industry, do you think the story would be different for those born and bred in Monticello as opposed to Fallsburg or Liberty, or do you think we all have similar stories?
I don't think the essentials would be any different. I mean, look, I was growing up in South Fallsburg. In Fallsburg, in the town of Fallsburg, we were the great metropolitan center. But of course, we were much smaller than the big city of Monticello. So, it's all relative. Obviously, there were going to be some differences, but I can't imagine. I mean, we're all small towns, and I just can't imagine that the experience was a whole lot different. I mean, maybe you have a different take on it, but. Okay, anybody else want to ask anything? Yeah. I'm sorry, I can't see. All I see is, okay, some people have put their pictures up now. Okay. Well, it was quite fascinating to me to go back as I was editing these interviews for the book, to see how people in my own family, what they remembered, to look at the pictures. I have pictures of my family in front of my house in South Fallsburg, where my father, by the way, is still living. Okay, he's going to be 99 this year. You look out the window from his house towards the school, what used to be where I went to elementary school, then became the ARC, and then whatever the Orthodox organization took over, and the building's now falling apart. But you used to be able to see the school, and I could watch a man go up in the morning and raise the flag on the roof. And you can't see it now because the trees have grown up. If you look at the pictures in other directions taken from the front of my house, you see wide open spaces. You could see the hills in the background with the buildings, and now you can't see anything but trees. So some of these pictures really give you a view of what the town or what the area was like. It was quite different, and it's not at all what we see today. And to me, that's just a symbol of the tremendous changes that took place over the course of the 20th century. It's hard to go back in time and really try to live the experience. But I mean, how many of you can remember hearing all the loudspeakers from the bungalow colonies? I remember Dishner's, which was right behind my house. My cousin Ira played on their softball team. And I can remember I used to play the drums in a band in the bungalow colonies. I get home 3 o'clock in the morning. I wanted to go to sleep, and Sunday morning, early Sunday, those loudspeakers would be going, Ira, get up, come on down here. It's time to play ball. And, you know, I'm trying to sleep. We used to hear from all the way up on La Vista Drive, which is where Cutler's Cottages is, which was my grandparents built. And we could hear whether it was the Knish man or the fruit man, all the vendors. And we used to be able to see the house. I could drive up on La Vista Drive and look across the valley up to the hills where my house was. And, you know, I could see my house from here. Yeah, I could. But you can't see it now. It's a different world.
David, I have a question for you. At the outset, you mentioned that your life was not separated, but different from the hotel life. Was your life not still influenced by the hotel industry?
Of course it was. I mean, it was unavoidable. I don't want to diminish the role of the resorts. I mean, I worked, as I said, I played in a band in bungalow colonies for a few years. I was a bellhop at the Flagler and a busboy at Shank's Hotel. And, you know, your families all do business with the hotels. So it's absolutely unavoidable. But, you know, I went home at night. I didn't live in the helps quarters. I didn't spend my weekends, well, yeah, if I was working, but I didn't spend my nights in the hotel. Maybe some of you did, but I didn't. The bungalow colonies, of course, my aunt ran Cutler's Cottages, and I spent a lot of time there. In the summers, I went to camp there. So you can't, there's no way around it. But as I said, I went home at night. When fall rolled around, I didn't go back to the city. I went to school. I went to the movies. I went bowling. I did, you know, skiing in the winter and sledding. We did all those kinds of things. But we certainly, you know, I didn't go back to the city and then come back and have live full time at a bungalow colony or a hotel. So yeah, it was intertwined with the hotels, but it wasn't exclusively the hotels. We had another life.
David, we've had a number of people, the library, I'm associated with the library, has interviewed a number of people. And in fact, your dad, we have a wonderful video of your dad being interviewed by John Conway, I believe.
Right.
And he does explain some of, you know, the history behind the banks and the businesses. One of the things we hear from so many people who, when we have done panels of Borscht Belt interest, so many people reflect on the wonderful childhood they had growing up here. Can you elaborate on that from your perspective?
Well, first of all, both my father and my father's Harold Gold, my uncle Raymond, both of them in their interviews talked about how great it was growing up in South Fallsburg. I mean, they just loved it. They have nothing but the fondest memories. And if you read those interviews, it really comes through. Oh, my Aunt Martha also, Martha Gold. She grew up technically in the town of Thompson, but it was really closer to South Fallsburg than to Monticello, near Hurleyville, actually. And they all had these wonderful memories. Life was safe. They had a lot of action around them, you know, with the other kids, lots of games and other things that occupied their time, but they were happy memories. I guess they were very fortunate that they didn't suffer too badly from the Depression, because some of those memories are not going to be very happy. But in my family, they were pretty good memories. Yeah, if you're asking about my years, my childhood, I was born in 1950. So I grew up in the 50s and the 60s. I had a pretty good childhood. The trouble is that, you know, in my late childhood, the area began to decline. So when I was a teen, you're talking about, you get past 1966 and 67, and the decline had really set in. I mean, it was still, the place was still going, and there was still business. It wasn't dead like it became another 10 or 12 years after that. But you could see it. But as long as I was growing up, I'd say I had pretty good memories. But of course, nobody that I was friendly with stayed. Nobody. My older brother, a few years older, his friends, a bunch of them stayed in the area, and they're still there, some of them. But for me, not a single one stayed. So maybe that tells you something.
I stayed.
Yeah, you stayed. Yeah, right. But Sammy didn't stay, though. I was friendly with
Sammy
Sammy.
did not. No, my cousins did not.
No. Yeah, but your whole family stayed, didn't they? Everybody.
We found Monticello boys, so we stayed.
Well, yeah, the exciting big cities. So you.
And we found jobs, professional level jobs, which
Yeah.
helped also.
Yeah.
I'm trying to unmute Jay Rosenberg, but I don't see his name. I see your name over there, but I don't see it. Are you listed as a phone number?
He was listed as Jay.
Oh, there he is. Okay, sorry. Gotcha, Jay.
Thank you. Am I unmuted? Yeah, it looks that way.
Yep.
Yeah, a couple of things. First of all, thanks for putting this together, and especially the focus on all us year-rounders who grew up and our whole families and community. I want to just make a couple of quick comments. One is, first of all, I don't think people even who came up for the resorts or talk about the Catskills realize how rural the area was and how much agriculture and farming the economy was outside of, I would say, it seemed like outside of the hotels and the bungalow economies and all the businesses that supported that, you know, the notion of how rural a small town it really was. I use this as the example. I remember, and maybe folks also remember, the first day of hunting season would be a legal excuse to be out of school if you had to hunt, because there were certain families who relied on deer meat and venison to survive the winter, because that's where they would get their food. And because so much of an influence of New York City, or the city as everyone would call it, and it was like both a combination of quasi-cosmopolitan, or at least being aware of like all of that and having that in there, as well as rural, made the experience really unique and really fun to grow up in.
Can you see this picture? I'm trying to share a picture, so you'll see.
I see the picture.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
with the cows. Yeah,
Yeah.
in the barn.
That's the Levner farm, Harry Levner.
And that
Yeah,
could be countless of other farms. I like the Lift farm, our farm.
I mean, look at the snow. What did
Yeah.
people do in the winter? Well, some people were farmers, and the farm doesn't just stop. I mean, you got animals you got to take care of.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
We used to live the big city of Monticello in the summers to go up to Bethel, where our farm was,
Yeah.
where my grandmother and my uncle's farm was in there. And when you mentioned hearing, we could hear the loudspeakers from Bungalow Colonies, even though they were quite a distance away. You know, it was just the background noise.
You know, one of the obviously the title of the book is Real Catskill Jews. And part of the book is about Jewish life. Now, a lot of what it describes is just small town life in general, which is why I came up with the subtitle. which is Memories of Small Town Life in 20th Century America, because a lot of what it says could apply to any small town all across the country. That includes things like volunteer fire departments and one-room schoolhouses and small town politics, you know, all of that stuff. It's just not particularly Jewish, it's just small town America. But we happen to be a Jewish community. So part of what I have here is, what did these small town Jews do? Of course, some of them were like the Levners, they were farmers. So you had small town Jews who were farmers, living here all year and taking care of the animals in the winter and so on. But we had Jewish life, and we had life that was community life that involved Jews. You know, I don't know how much any of you have studied Jewish history in general. If you take a course in American Jewish history, I have a feeling that you're not going to get a whole lot of this. You'll get the Lower East Side, you'll get Jewish communities in Chicago and Los Angeles, you'll get the development of the Reform movement, all kinds of things that are, of course, great interest to Jewish history, but I don't know if you get any of this stuff. And this, for us, I mean, this was our life. And we were as Jewish as anybody else. But I want to see if I can, let me see if I can find my screen share again. Here's an example. Well, actually, let me give you this one here. This is a bar mitzvah in 1936 in the South Fallsburg Synagogue. So this is 1936. I think it was the same year my father had his bar mitzvah. And he told me that he had to give a little talk in Yiddish, which I was pretty impressed about, because a lot of kids, they understand it if their parents spoke it. It doesn't mean that they spoke it. But here's a little picture of small town life in the 1930s for Jews. I have another one here that's closer to my generation, so a little bit before me. Hang on one second here. That is a Talmud Torah class in South Fallsburg in the 1950s. This man, Rabbi Bullman, later became a big macher in Israel, but for a while he was small town rabbi. And these are his kids dressed up for Purim. Part of small town life. And it's gone now because there's no Talmud Torah left. Sarah, you want to say something?
I'm sure you've kept in touch with people, know what's going on. Do you see the rise in the Hasidic communities in Sullivan County as like the circle continues, or do you think that's something different?
Yeah. Well, it certainly isn't continuing what we knew.
No.
It's continuing a Jewish presence in a different way. It's not one that I'm thrilled with altogether, but you know, what can you do? Times change. If you want an interesting experience, it's not a Jewish experience, but a test of imagination. I remember going to there's a Canal Lock Museum in Cutterbackville. I assume it's still there. I went there many years ago. But when the D&H Canal ran through a portion of Sullivan County and Orange County back in the 19th century, it was a real bustling place. There were all of these canal boats, and they're being towed by these boys leading mules, and there's a lot of employee, you know, the canal men cussing and singing and stopping to pick up supplies at various places and so on. And if you go there now, or at least when I went there many years ago, I assume it's the same, it's so peaceful and it's so quiet. It's beautiful, but you have to really use your imagination to see what it was like back in the 19th century. And now if you want to recreate in your mind the Jewish life that we lived in the 1950s and 60s, and maybe a few people older here, I don't know, I can't see everybody's picture, but go back to the 40s. It's very, very different, and you need to use your imagination. How do you tell people what it was like? It's very hard. So
David, is that very different from many other communities around the country? I mean, I grew up in Ohio, actually.
Yeah, where?
In Youngstown. And certainly my experience of, at the time when I was growing up, 175,000 people there. Now there's maybe 60, 65. They used to be 5 or 6 different synagogues, all sporting their own religious schools. And now there's one religious school. There's a couple of temples that just merged. So I'm curious how that experience is different from what you experienced here in terms of comparison then and now.
Well,
it seems very similar is my point.
Yeah, I mean, obviously the specific experience is different, but the idea that things change, I mean, obviously that's everywhere. I mean, I know somebody here in Ohio, an Orthodox Jewish guy who's a professor at Ohio State, who's from the town of Marietta in southeastern Ohio. He grew up there, Orthodox Jewish. There's probably not a single Jew left in Marietta. I mean, where are small town Jews anywhere in this country anymore? Outside of the Catskills, and the numbers even in the Catskills are pretty small now. Except for the Hasidim, which is a different experience. But yeah, I mean, life changes. But if you want to try to hold on to it, to explain it to somebody else, it's hard to do unless you have somebody who's preserved the memories, which is why what I tried to do in this book, it's not that I'm doing it in the hope that someday we'll go back to that. That's not going to happen, and shouldn't happen. I mean, you don't want to live through the Depression, and you don't want to live in a time when you had, all kinds of diseases that you couldn't treat. Life expectancy was half what it is now. You don't want to be that kind of nostalgic, but still, if you're interested in history, which I am, some people don't care about it. You want to be able to evoke a time and a place. You need the resources for it. You need to preserve the memories. I hope there are other people. I know, Sarah, you said you're working on something, family history. Yeah.
I'm working on a memoir, basically about how unusual, let's say, my parents, especially my father, was. I grew up in a family up until I was 10 years old. My father was a cattle dealer. So thank you, Jay Rosenberg, wherever you are. We had farms. There was the Rosenheck farm in Sackett Lake.
Yeah.
And my mother started her own business in 1961 because she was bored at home with a 3-year-old. So my parents weren't the norm, but I think Sullivan County wasn't the norm.
No.
So it was kind of perfect.
No. Yeah, I was going to say Denise. It says Denise Rapper.
It says Denise.
That's the nephew.
It's Denise and I'm the nephew. As my uncle said, it's Marvin, David. I don't remember that we met, but your dad's a wonderful guy and a great friend.
I've seen you online a few times.
Yes. An observation and then a question.
Yeah.
Most of the people in the Jewish community that were raised here or that came here pretty much either earned their living, in my opinion, through the resorts or through, like your dad, servicing the resorts. So your picture, I'm asking a question so much. The picture of the Jewish community here is one that's interwoven with the Borscht Belt experience. It's not like we had well, in Ellenville, they had Channel Master or something. We didn't have a factory here in Monticello and Fallsburg. We didn't have other businesses to speak of. There were businesses that served the resorts for the most part. So that's why we're probably different than Ohio or other places with small Jewish communities. So my question is, because I haven't read the book yet, but I looked at it. What did you find in your interactions and in your interviews that surprised you about what people said about growing up here that might not have been related to the cycle that we all went through? You know, growing up, my family had the Delano, my aunt had Kaplan's, and so we all had that. There was something crazy about working in the hotel business 8 weeks straight, 7 days a week in the dining room, 3 meals a day, no meals off, no days off. And then in the winter, you have to live off whatever you earned for those 2 months primarily, although there were small shopkeepers. What did you find? What's a great story that you learned in one of your interviews or two of your interviews that you never would have thought you were going to find out by interviewing local people?
Well, first of all, let me just preface a response by saying that we might not have been quite so different from every place else as we think. And the reason I say that is I have a friend here in Ohio who's from Michigan. And because of somebody in his family, I don't remember what the connection was, but through him, I got to learn about a Jewish resort area in Michigan that had what we call bungalow colonies. I don't know if they called them bungalow colonies, but a very, very similar experience. Probably not on the scale, and I don't think they had the enormous hotels, but that surprised me. It wasn't in the course of working on this book, but just the idea that, we're not unique. I mean, there's someplace else in this world that has a similar experience, Jewish experience. So that surprised me. As far as this particular work is concerned, it's hard to say because I worked on this book for such a long period of time. Not that I was working on the book, but that I was doing things, letting it sit for years, coming back to it. And so I kind of, it didn't really, it's not like somebody hit me with a surprise. Wow, boom, look at that. It was just kind of organic. You know, we went through life together with my mess of materials till I finally straightened it out. Although I will say my Uncle Morris was full of surprises. If you knew Uncle Morris, anybody who knew Morris Gold, it just never ends. And the thing is, all of his stories are true. He would tell stories that you think this can't be true. How could one person know all these people, do all these crazy things? But I went through newspapers and I went online. I tried to verify all these stories. And you know what? They're true. I mean, in essence, he got the details wrong. He wasn't an academic. He wasn't a stickler for all the details. And sometimes his memory played tricks on him. But I mean, he told me a story about, this has nothing to do with the Catskills. This is just my Uncle Morris. Well, he was in Florida. And he and Raymond, now there's 9 years between them. So Raymond is a young guy at the time. Because I asked him if this story was true, and he told me yes. He was maybe 18 or 19 at the time. So Morris would have been in his late 20s. And he was already in this world of gangsters and boxers and all these celebrities. And they were at this bar that was owned by the brother of, I'm trying to remember which one of the racketeers, one of the labor racketeers or somebody. And something happened where the bartender stopped serving him drinks. So Morris, being Morris, demands to see the owner. And the owner comes out, and he's this gangster's brother. So he's a gangster himself. So Morris and the gangster, I'm trying to, without looking it up in the book, I can't remember the guy's name, but they get into it. And the gangster, of course, got his goons standing by. But Morris, being Morris, was not afraid of anybody or anything. Or if he was, he didn't show it. He blustered his way through everything. And he says, I'm going to get, you know who it was? It was Johnny Dio. Anybody know the name Johnny Dio? He was a labor racketeer. It was his brother, I think, who owned this place. And he says, all right, I'm going to get Joe Silvani on the phone. Joe Silvani is not a well-known gangster. He stayed in the background. He was a hitman. But as Raymond told me once, he only killed you if you deserved it. So it's 2 o'clock in the morning. He calls up Joe Silvani. Joe Silvani says, all right, put these other guys on the phone. He talks to them. 10 minutes later, the owner tells the bartender, give these guys anything they want. Anytime, anything, anytime, whatever. That's people he hung out with. The people who had this kind of illicit authority. But he was full of stories like this. And as I say, Raymond confirmed the story. He said, yeah, it's exactly what happened. He remembered it.
But a lot of those folks that he came in contact with came to the Catskills.
Yeah.
I mean, we know there was gangsters here in the 20s, 30s, whatever the years were. And we know that almost all the major boxers trained here, from Rocky Marciano on down up to, Muhammad Ali and to Floyd Patterson, all these. So again, it's because of our culture that all these famous people, you don't have to do more than just look at the wall in Grossinger's that used to be. Remember, outside the coffee shop?
Well,
there was a wall with like 500 pictures.
I have in the book, I have a few pictures with Rocky Marciano.
Yeah.
The reason I have Rocky, and I could have had a lot more. The reason I have Rocky Marciano is once again because of Morris. Morris became Rocky's great buddy, and they really were, because I remember him at the house. In fact, my brother sent me recently, he transferred some film from old movie film onto DVD and sent me a file. So, there we are. Charlie Goldman, his manager, was sitting outside our house sitting in a hammock or something, and I'm dressed up in my little cowboy outfit with my cowboy hat and my cap gun. But I mean, I remember Rocky at the house. He was there all the time. They were really good friends, and the way they met was once again Joe Silvani. How he met Joe Silvani, I have no idea. Morris promised my father that for a B'nai B'rith function or something, he was going to get Rocky. Oh, yeah, I think it was something like that. He was going to get Rocky Marciano to speak. He didn't know Rocky, but Rocky was training at Grossinger's. So Morris goes up there. He says, tries to get in. They won't let him in. He said, now what am I going to do? I promised I was going to get Rocky. He calls up Joe Silvani. Joe Silvani calls up these guys. 2 minutes later, come on in. And he and Rocky became great buddies. But, so there's your hotel connection. There's no question though. But still, that's not, that wasn't my life. I had a connection with the hotels. Of course I did. So did you. So, well, you directly. Me, it was through relatives and camps and so on and working. But there's no question that we were all intertwined with the hotels and the bungalow colonies. Don't forget the bungalow colonies. That's my family. But, as I said, we had
one last comment, and I'm going to be quiet. you mentioned one other word, and you know, the Groucho Marx, the bird came down with the $50, Florida. Almost all of the resort owners either had properties or aspired to have properties or went to the, in those days, Miami Beach, South Beach primarily, either to meet everybody else from Sullivan County who was there, or in my grandfather's case, he hired his help for the summer at Wolfie's and Pumpernickel's and all the other places that he would go to in the winter and find his chef and find his maitre d' and find his second chef and so forth. So there was that, it was sort of bi-coastal, but sort of north-south instead of east-west, where almost all of these people that we know that lived here spend some part of the winter, whether it's a week or 2 weeks or a month or 6 months in some cases. And it all reinforced the shtetl nature and the connections between all of the Jewish community that were here in the summer.
Yeah,
Full
but
time.
I don't know if the non-resort people did that. You know, I remember going to Florida, but that was just a vacation like anybody could take from anywhere. It was not specifically related to looking for the resorts or, you know, working there until the season started or something like that. It was that was a different situation. And, you know, for me anyway, and I assume for most people, they went to Florida maybe for a few, you know, short vacation, a week. You go in the winter during the school vacation, you might go to the beach and take 4 hours on a prop plane and or drive for 3 days, whatever it was. But it wasn't the kind of connection you're talking about. Now, for resort people, yeah, but for people who weren't in the resorts, that wasn't part of our life. You know, one second, let me just, I want to see if there's something else I can bring up here. Because we were talking about, you know, the winter again. So what did we do in the winter? Well, some people went to Florida for the winter or for part of the winter. I mean, I've no question about it. I didn't, except for, you know, those few very short vacations. But this is an old picture of the Rivoli Theater, and you can see this this store here. I mean, when I was growing up, it wasn't there. This is before my time because the concession was in here for the movies. But this, I believe, was Al Kunis's original store. And you can see the snowbank here. So, I mean, while you were basking on the beach in Florida, we were plowing through the snow to get to the movies. Friday night was the big movie night in South Fallsburg. But you know, it's another piece of local life. Everybody had movie theaters, right? There were three. How many? Three in Monticello were there? I think
two. Originally two. It was Broadway and Rialto. Eventually, in early '70s or '60s, by James Way, General Cinema, and then
by Apollo.
Shortly after the Apollo Mall, it used to be the Jerry Lewis Twin Theater there, and then
ShopRite.
Right.
Yeah.
Montego. Well, that was where the Jerry Lewis was. Yeah.
No, that was the Apollo is where Jerry Lewis was.
Oh, right, the Apollo Mall. But
doesn't matter. Let's not get into this.
Even White Lake had the Ritz, you know, South Fallsburg. They all had their movie theater.
Yeah, everybody. Woodburn
closed down for the winter.
Liberty had two, I think. But
Liberty had two, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, this was something that we did in the winter. It was part of our community life, and it was really kind of an important part of the community life because it was a regular thing. I mean, Friday nights in South Fallsburg, it was almost mandatory. All the kids went to the movies on Friday night.
Monticello too.
Yes.
Yeah, why it was Friday, I don't know. The Drifters did a song about Saturday night at the movies. They didn't live in Fallsburg.
I think it was to avoid going to synagogue.
The Drifters?
No, the Friday night at the movies.
Oh, yeah, right.
I have a comment about the bungalow colonies because before I changed my name to Wedvik, it was Mayberg. But anyway, my grandparents on my father's side, paternal grandparents left Ukraine in 1913 and moved to New York City and in the Bronx. And my father was a furrier. And at some point, my grandparents bought a bungalow colony. Now, how they managed to get from Ukraine to New York and have enough money to buy a bungalow colony still astounds me. But my father spent a lot of summers there. He was the one who learned to drive at 13, so they drive up there. And I do remember going to the casino, and Mayberg's had a lake. None of the other bungalow colonies had a lake. And my father was the lifeguard. And I've got bunches of pictures from there. And my cousins would get to spend the summer there in the big house with my grandmother, because my grandfather died in 1944, so I never met him. But my father did all the work, and we were living in Monticello, so we didn't get to play out there so much. But it's fascinating now to me because I have my grandmother's passport from when she left Ukraine, and the birth certificate of my father's oldest sister. And to see
Where
how
were Ukraine? Where were they?
right on the border with Romania and near Chernovitz and so on, which is where my maternal grandparents were from. But to see the passport now and to wonder, how did they make that big move to New York, to the Bronx? My grandfather made fur coats and then suddenly have a bungalow colony. So we went back and forth visiting grandparents and cousins in New York City.
My grandparents also came from Ukraine, my mother's family, and started a bungalow colony, but they didn't live in the area. Now, my grandfather worked, I don't know what his original job was, probably something in the Lower East Side, where he eventually got a job with a lumber company. The boss liked him, and my grandfather almost became like a partner in this business. This is in New Jersey. And he decided, he and his brother, who both eventually took over this business, rather than be summer guests, they would have their own place. And that's how they started Cutler's Cottages. Now you say, where did they get the money? They got it from wherever they were doing in the city.
Yeah, well, I don't think furriers made all that much money, but I love my grandmother's fur coat. But my father was, of course, drafted into the Army, but he had a heart condition, so he was discharged. And afterwards, he decided to stay in Monticello, and he worked for Coca-Cola bottling, and later on was a rural letter carrier. But my mother, when he married my mother, he made her come to the Catskills, which is not what she essentially wanted to do. She worked in a credit exchange in Manhattan. But that's how my father decided to just stay in Monticello and help his parents, who then moved there too.
Yeah. But it'd be interesting to know, what did they ever describe what their life was like as Jews in Monticello?
That's the problem. I mean, my parents, yes, but my grandmother, I don't remember ever having a good conversation about anything. And that's the sad part now. If you know that my grandmother died in 1965, my grandfather died in 1944. So now I have all this information with lots of questions, but my parents are gone. And so I can talk to my cousins. My father's two sisters had children, and I talk to them occasionally. They have more information than I do.
I can tell you, this is for everybody listening. You should all start writing down memoirs. You can do it in all kinds of ways. If you're the kind of person, a self-starter, you can sit down and start writing memoirs. If you're not that way, just sit down and talk to somebody, share ideas, and record it. There's so much. First of all, like just today, I got a notice that my mother's cousin died. She's the last one from that generation. The last. There are no more. Now, my generation, as I said, I'll be 72 this year. I have some cousins who are older, maybe around 80, up to 75 and 80. We are going to be gone soon too. I mean, sooner than you think. And whether anybody else will care in the future, I don't know. But your families might be interested someday. Your children, your grandchildren, some scholar who's looking to recreate, you know, to write about this aspect of Jewish American history. And the more material we have, the better. You know, when I published the book, I posted a notice about it in a Facebook book site, and somebody commented, "Oh, there's one family who shall remain nameless. 3 members of the family complained because their family wasn't in it." I mean, you can't write I never collected their family. Whatever. I won't go through the whole story. I didn't interview everybody in South Fallsburg. But my response was, well, you do it. Write it down. Publish it. You don't want to publish it, just let people know it's available. Post it online. But we all have these memories that are interesting to somebody. And they might be interesting to a lot of people. But if you don't write them down or you don't record them somehow, they're going to be gone. And I think the more people who do it, the better. Now, this book that I have, I didn't publish every interview that I had because some of them really did not focus much on life in South Fallsburg. They were more personal history, Europe, whatever. But I'm looking at the people. I'm looking at my index now, my table of contents. I mean, these are people from my father's generation, and some of them are older. And they're all gone, almost all of them. And you can't recreate this. You can't get it anywhere else.
Show us the cover, please.
Well, ignore this strip here. This is a proof copy, but.
Okay.
And the picture, by the way, the reason I have that picture there, that's my Uncle Raymond and his dog Pudgy. And probably at the an Old Falls, you know, on the Neversink. But you know, a boy and his dog. What's more American? What's more rural? And it's a Jewish kid and it's a Jewish dog. I mean, but that's part of the point here. This is small town Jewish life. But if we don't preserve it, you know, so everybody start writing.
So I have a quick plug, I guess. First of all, this past summer, I digitized literally hours of home movies from the 50s and the 60s and even the 40s that my father had filmed. So I have tons of, it's mostly family stuff, but a lot of, you know, Broadway and the horse racing on White Lake in the winter and when it was frozen over, if you remember, if people remember that. And just a variety of things. But if I can put a plug, I'm going to put it in the chat if that's all right. I put together a video in honor of my parents' 75th wedding anniversary, which would have been this past October, of some of the clips of these videos to a song that captures a little bit of that life.
Yeah, and that's great. You know,
I'm going to put it on the chat right now. If you go to the chat, there's a YouTube link.
How do you save it from the chat? Because this is over, it goes away.
You copy it.
You just
Copy it and then paste it into a.
copy and paste it.
Yeah.
Paste it into a Word
You can
document.
do save chat on the lower right hand corner by the 3 dots.
Thank you.
But you see, what's good about this kind of these videos is that
Must be on a laptop.
you know, again, if they disappear, how do you recreate these? How do you even show people what it was like? You'd be like the D&H Canal. You can't, you know, there's a beautiful park there, and it's not at all what life was like at that spot. But if you have videos, even more than interviews, I mean, that really shows, that has an impact, I think, that just writing doesn't have.
No, just
Are you
copy
talking
it.
it?
You paste it.
You know, you talk about, recording your, your history and things. We tried to record my mother's story a number of years ago, found out that the recorder wasn't working right. So we lost all of it.
Yeah, I had that experience.
I'm thinking of trying to record, this stuff. What I'm thinking of, maybe rather than writing it down, one can use Zoom and just talk to Zoom yourself, and in a recording way. You can even push on the transcript, and you get a written, not exactly, the words don't come out exactly right, but Zoom might be an easier way than trying to write everything down and with your computer and stuff. It's just one method. But a question for you, I put into the chat also. I realized that we all grew up in small towns in the Catskills, but these towns were very Jewish. Like, I grew up in like Sheldrake, but I did high school in Liberty, and we did a survey in our high school. We were 1/3 Jewish, 1/3 Protestant, 1/3 Catholic. Most people who grow up in small towns, Jewish people in small towns, don't have this, Jewish environment that we had.
Right.
I mean, if they're only 2% rather than 30%, I think life may be very different.
Yeah, absolutely. Because first of all, you feel, especially in those days, I don't know about now, but in those days, you would have felt very conspicuous and very different. When you have a sufficient mass, it becomes the norm. My father went to school in South Fallsburg. He didn't go to one of these one-room schoolhouses. By the way, did I show that picture already, the one-room schoolhouse?
No.
Yeah, let me just bring that up on the screen. That used to stand on the Tunnel Hill Road going outside of South Fallsburg.
You can't.
Yeah, I mean, that stood there. This picture dates to about 1994. One year just finally fell in, and the only thing left is a concrete slab. But there were kids, Jewish and non-Jewish, who lived on the outskirts of town, the farms and so on, who lived in these little schools. They went to school in these little schools. They didn't live there. My father didn't. My father went to school in South Fallsburg. So he lived in the village. In the village, there were a lot of Jews. I have his program from his 8th grade commencement or whatever. There were, I would guess, about 1/3 Jewish. People later on came to have this idea that somehow Fallsburg was all Jewish, which it never was. I mean, it probably peaked in my years. I graduated in 1968, and about half the class was Jewish. But in South Fallsburg, where there were a lot of Jewish kids, being Jewish was normal. It was not different. You didn't stand out. You weren't a minority. I mean, you weren't a minority because nobody was a majority. So if you were part Catholic, there were Catholic immigrants from Russia and Poland. There were Protestants who were more native. Their families had been here longer. But you were accepted. I found very little recollection of anti-Semitism. Nobody I interviewed said there was anti-Semitism in South Fallsburg, except maybe, a couple of cranks somewhere. My father was very friendly with a lot of non-Jews. Didn't the kids?
David, there was restricted property. I remember asking my mother when I was a child, gee, why can't we have a cabin on Wanasink Lake? And she would say, oh, because they don't sell property to Jews. Same thing in Forestburg, but that was there. And she told me, I remember her telling me specifically, people think Jews have horns. I learned as a child, there was.
But look at the places you're talking about. Forestburg.
Doesn't matter. It still was around there.
Yeah,
my father delivered mail in Forestburg. And I think the point is there were restricted properties, which I didn't ask why was that happening when I was a child, but to know it is to know more of the history of the area. You can't forget it.
Yeah, but in South Fallsburg, or probably, I would guess in Monticello too, I don't know. But in
This is
South
around
Fallsburg,
Monticello.
Oh, yeah,
I can only-
there was still anti-Semitism,
I can tell
A
you,
lot of it.
I spoke,
more so in our parents' days.
I have these interviews with my father, my uncle, other people, who did I have? I have Herb Sikowski, if you knew him, if you know the Sikowski family, and I have Morty Michaels. Yeah, I mean, Morty Michaels talked about, he was town supervisor for 39 years, or something like that. He talked about how there was anti-Semitism on the board of supervisors from the more rural towns, from the places where you didn't have the Jews.
Well,
Where
let
they
me
were-
tell you, I just want to add this because my father worked for the post office, as did I can't remember his first name, but Phyllis Asman's father. Anyway, my father and Mr. Asman were both rural letter carriers, and the post office in Monticello was one of the most anti-Semitic places you can remember. My father had a terrible time, but he kept that job because it was secure. Now that's right in Monticello. So I think things may
Well-
not seem like that on the surface, but they were there.
Okay, write your memoirs.
I will.
Then we'll add them to mine and we'll come up with a more complete story. But that's a perfect example of why people should write down what they have. But I'm only reporting what I discovered in South Fallsburg. And my father and my uncle and these other people who grew up there, not all of them grew up in South Fallsburg, but those who grew up there really did not remember much anti-Semitism at all. And they had lots of Gentile friends. And they did a lot of things that maybe you wouldn't normally associate with Jews. The hunting and the fishing and and the mischief and all kinds of things like that. But they were just typical small town stories that involved Jews and Gentiles alike. And it's one of the reasons why they had such fond memories of growing up there.
Can you put your email address in the chat? Because I like to email you about some things like later on.
Okay. I'm going to if anybody's interested, I'm going to give you an email address. Okay. So anybody who wants to email me there, feel free. I check it just about every day. Oops, wait a minute. Okay. Where were we? Were we anywhere?
Well, I just wanted to reiterate, I see that Suzanne Cecil put in the chat that your book is also available at the museum in Hurleyville if you'd like to buy it locally instead of on Amazon.
Right.
Thank you, Suzanne.
Yeah. If anybody has read the book and wants to make comments, I'm open to, you can make critical comments too. As I said, I've already gotten a few of those from people who weren't in the book. It is funny, people tend to, I don't have an index to this book, but people tend to look at the index and say, well, the first thing I'm going to look for is my family's name. And if it's not there, I don't need to read this book. But it's not what it's about. The experience applies to an awful lot of people. I want to see if there are any more pictures that I didn't put up yet. I don't think so. I actually had a lot of pictures, but I was afraid that we would get bogged down in looking at the pictures. But anyway, to reiterate, a lot of this discussion tonight veered off into the resorts. And of course, as we all agreed, it's unavoidable. But I tried really to show aspects of Jewish life we just had Pesach, Passover. I remember growing up with huge seders. My mother always hosted the seders, 2 of them, and we had a crowd every year. To me, that was part of growing up. I don't know if everybody did that. I think most of my friends in Fallsburg did. They at least had seders, whether they were that big, I don't know. But to me, that was also a part of growing up Jewish in Fallsburg. We never had, to my recollection, non-Jewish guests at the seders, but the kids knew about them. One interesting thing that happened on our street was all Jewish, except for one family. This family, they were Catholic, they were Polish Catholic. And we were always told growing up, on the major holidays, the Jewish kids, you're not supposed to ride your bike. I never understood that. But we weren't supposed to go riding our bikes on Shavuos or Sukkos, whatever it was. We all did it, except for this one Catholic kid, because his mother wouldn't let him. She said, out of respect for her Jewish neighbors, she wasn't going to let this kid ride his bike. So this poor kid had to watch everybody else, all the Jewish kids riding their bikes. But I, to me, that is, I think, a pretty good picture of how Jews and non-Jews got along in Fallsburg. In my high school class, as I say, we're about half Jewish. I don't think that there was the slightest hesitation about, dating, boyfriends and girlfriends, and whether religion made the slightest difference to anybody. I don't remember any anti-Semitism. I don't remember anything at all negative about being Jewish. It was just natural, and
Let me comment about that. It's very similar, I think, to our ancestors in Ukraine. Like my father also came from Buchach, which is near Lvov. These places were fairly highly Jewish population. Like Buchach, for example, had a Jewish mayor for over 20 years. But once the Nazis came, things changed. People who were very friendly suddenly became less friendly. I've read memoirs of people from Buchach after my father left a long time, and suddenly things changed. So, we were lucky when there was no overt anti-Semitism in South Fallsburg or like Sheldrake or Liberty or Matzah, whatever. But, luckily the country never changed.
Well, when things get tense, it brings out the worst in people. You have Nazis invade. Yeah, it encourages the slime balls to crawl out from under their rocks, and it's a combination of fear and maybe some hatred that was being hidden underneath. But here, I know people experienced anti-Semitism here. I know Helen's uncle, Manny Gold, told me about his experience being fired from a job when the boss found out he was Jewish for no other reason. And I heard stories like that, but that was in New York. It was in the city. It wasn't in Fallsburg. There were, how to what extent European anti-Semitism carried over into this country, I don't know. Did the anti-Semites come here, or only the Jews? The people who persecuted the Jews in Ukraine probably didn't come here. Most of them.
Of course not. The other people are fleeing the pogroms. So, we didn't have pogroms in Monticello, but they were certainly there in the Ukraine.
Right. Well, I know my grandparents, my mother's parents left Ukraine. It was after the I think it was a pogrom in 1905, a big pogrom. And my grandmother told me how she used to have to hide. So she and most of the kids were hiding in the attic while his mob destroyed their home.
Right.
So she had very vivid memories of that. But again, that was in Ukraine. It wasn't here.
But there was anti-Semitism here. I mean, I started school in kindergarten in Luxembourg. We had like basically a one-room schoolhouse. Mrs. Walters was my teacher. But I learned later on that someone, I forget her name now, who was Jewish, had been the teacher there. And she quit because she said the education department was completely anti-Semitic. So, I mean, there were bits of anti-Semitism that we didn't usually see.
Yeah, well. Anyway, but that's just one aspect of Jewish life. I do have instances where people reported anti-Semitism. What I think really, one story I heard repeatedly was about the KKK burning a cross at the top of the hill where Thompson and Fallsburg come together near Hurleyville up on Columbia Hill, somewhere in that vicinity. But supposedly, everybody's recollection was that was anti-Catholic, not anti-Jewish. They didn't like the Catholics. In fact, I interviewed, not for this book, for different time. I talked to these two guys in Livingston Manor. These two old guys, must have been in their 80s at the time I interviewed them, which was many years ago. They were lifelong friends. They had gone to kindergarten together. And they were talking about the Ku Klux Klan in Livingston Manor. But again, their recollection was it wasn't anti-Jewish. It was more of, I don't know if social is the right word, a fraternal organization, but it wasn't, Jews weren't their targets. I don't know if that improves things, just they didn't hate us, thank God, but maybe they hated somebody else.
Yeah, but if they hated somebody else, they hated us too.
Right.
Exactly.
I don't know, maybe.
I remember talking to Chris at our reunion, our 50th reunion.
Yeah.
And she said she was upset in high school because she was not invited to bar mitzvahs, and all the Jewish kids were. She's not Jewish.
That's interesting. I don't remember that.
Yeah.
I know I didn't invite her to my bar mitzvah, but I don't think I knew her too well then. Now, she was from Woodburn.
Yes.
And of course, now Woodburn turned into a Jewish town, but.
And Catholic.
Well, yeah, but after the Hasidim started moving in, Woodburn,
yes.
When it was like a little Muncie or something, I don't know. But
I just wanted to add about Monticello. I've often thought about this. Besides there being maybe 2 to 3 synagogues, there was a Methodist church, a Presbyterian church, a Catholic church. It was such a mixture for such a small town of 5,000. I always think that's remarkable.
Yeah, it's good. Broadens the mind. One thing we haven't really talked about, I only mentioned it in passing, was the fire departments. Fallsburg had what was known as the Jewish fire department. I have a photo of all the members standing in front of the firehouse from 1931 maybe or something like that. And almost every fireman is Jewish, almost every one. I think if you talk about a history of Jewish life in America, you're not going to hear too many mentions about Jewish firemen. But this was it. I mean, in South Fallsburg, and some of you from the other towns can tell me what the participation rate was there, but in South Fallsburg, for many, many years, the fire department, which was founded mostly by Jews after a fire burned down half the town, for many, many years, it was mostly a Jewish fire department. And I know in my family, my uncle Morris was the president of the fire department for 50 years. We had Jewish chiefs. Monroe Levine, for example, was one of the chiefs of the fire department. Nunny Magnick. I remember my experience in the fire department. That was a great experience. Well, I turned 18. My birthday is at the end of August. So shortly before I went to college, I turned 18. So I didn't have an opportunity to get all the training. You know, they would have drills and so on. So I didn't know anything. My first fire was actually at Golden Rados, which Helen will remember. I came home from college for Thanksgiving. And the plectron went off, you know, the radio that you have. Fire at Golden Rados. Well, I wasn't quick enough to get down to the firehouse and jump on a truck. So I drove to the scene. And I remember I could see as I came around the bend going up the hill towards Kaimisha, the sky is all lit up because they had these chicken coops, these wooden chicken coops filled with straw and roast chicken. And you know,
Chicken feathers, lots of chicken feathers.
yes. And I got there and there's Manny out cold on the ground. He ran outside, fainted. But that was my first fire. It was a Jewish fire department, and it was a Jewish place that was burning. You know, it's part of Jewish life.
When the insurance company came and spoke to my parents about the fire and they saw how much insurance we had, they knew we didn't set it.
But the term Jewish lightning got prominence around that
Yes.
time.
I used to think that was just an anti-Semitic
It is.
stereotype. Well,
But
my
if-
father remembered an incident, though. He remembered an incident where he came across a guy, one of his Jewish customers, I guess, who was trying to burn down his bungalow colony.
Yeah.
He had gotten stuck in the mud and couldn't get away. He set the place on fire and couldn't get away. But yeah, so I mean that was a true incident. So you know,
Yeah.
how often that happened, I don't know. My brother used to tell me it was a friction fire. It was caused by the friction caused by the insurance papers and the mortgage papers rubbing together in the drawer. But the fire
David,
department, yeah.
Before you can keep talking, but as a member of the board at the library, and one, as you know, who's done a number of these, it's a thankless job to do what you did usually, because, you know, it's something that you're motivated to do. And I have similar records in keeping, working on a memoir of my dad who wrote home every day through the war, 3.5 years worth of letters. And my mother answered, and I've got them all. And so I just wanted to say thank you for what you've done. Thanks for taking the time to share your experiences with us, for reminding us what it was like, and for capturing as best you can the small town Jewish life which you've described. It is a wonderful, wonderful thing. And, you know, the next generations are going to be reading your work. And so thank you very much.
Well, you're welcome. And I would encourage everybody to do it. Talk to your children, your grandchildren, talk to your neighbors, turn on the recorder, talk to yourself. Murray Posner told me how he would record things just sitting by himself at night after the business of the hotel was done, to the extent that it ever got done. But you know, how he would record things. It really needs to be done because, as I said, even our generation, we're getting up there. And, you know, if we don't record our own experiences, plus what we remember from being told from earlier generations, it's going to be just gone. And, you know, I think I did a decent job in my book, but I hate to think it's the only source. It would be nice to know that other people are working on the same thing. And if anybody has any questions about how to go about it and how to put stuff together and so on, you know, just email me. So
Sheila, did you want to say something quickly? Sheila?
Yeah, I guess so. When you mentioned about the Jewish lightning, it really hit me because I went to a Hadassah meeting and John Conway was a guest speaker, and they were just joking about Jewish lightning, which I'm very sensitive about because my parents had a hotel in Loch Sheldrake and I almost lost them because it was an old hotel. There was a brownout, and when the electric came back, it started a fire in the big kitchen at the hotel. And if it was only because of the caretaker at Brown's Hotel that they were able to call the police department, the fire department, because the wires burned. So I spoke to John Conway after the Hadassah meeting, and I mentioned it, and I said, you know, when people talk about Jewish lightning, it's not right because all these people, my father worked so hard, you know, and then the hotel burned down. And it wasn't because of, you know, they didn't want the insurance. And as I said, I almost lost them. So I get very defensive when people talk about Jewish lightning. I'm sorry, that's just
Well,
me.
one of the good reasons to record your memories is to record stories like that. One of the things that started me many years ago on collecting stories, writing histories of local histories and interviewing people was the, I forget the exact name of it, The Rise and Fall of the Borscht Belt or something, supposedly a documentary by, what's his name, Peter Davis? Is he the guy who did this? Does anybody know? Well, in any event, I've seen this thing praised many times, but my recollection of it was just being appalled because it was caricature. It was not the way things really were. Caricature is great for comedians. You can joke about Jewish lightning, and you can joke about, you know, how much people ate in the hotels, and you can make all kinds of disparaging remarks and create horrible images of the Catskills. And again, we're talking about the resorts, but you know, it extends beyond that. But you know, that's comedy. And if you're going to take it for history, it's like the people who used to watch Jon Stewart on The Daily Show and think that that was real news. I mean, that's comedy. It's satire, but it's not the news. And if you don't want the prevailing view of our area to be what the comedians said about the place, you don't want it to be jokes about Jewish lightning, then you have to present the other side of the story. You have to present the true story. And you know, people need to do it, not just say, I wish somebody else would do it.
Right. Well, thank you, David. I think that was great. It was a great conversation. Come check out the book or buy a copy at the museum.
Okay, and I look forward to hearing from some of you.
Yeah, I will. Do you mind if I sent your email address to everybody who registered? You know, I think.
No, that's fine.
Okay.
That's fine.
All right, I will keep that. Thank you so much, David. Thank you, everybody, for your participation.
Okay.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Great
Bye.
night.